We have two regulars back in the economic war room. Both are experts on securing the electric grid. That's certainly a timely topic after the recent near miss of a solar flare that did create some amazing northern light effects that we saw as far south as Alabama. First, we have Tommy Waller, the president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. Tommy retired from the Marine Corps Reserves at the rank of lieutenant colonel after serving more than 2 decades on both active duty and in the reserve with deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa, and the Caribbean. David Tice is the CEO of Paul Revere Films, LLC, and the executive producer and financier of the major motion picture Soul Surfer. His passion for film led him to further success as an early investor when co-financing the script for Sony's feature film, When the Game Stands Tall. But in the last 3 years, he's completed the production of an award-winning feature documentary about the vulnerability of our power grid entitled Grid Down, Power Up. The documentary is serving as a springboard to initiate an organized social action movement to secure our nation's power grid. This is a truly economic story. Without the grid, there is no economy. Previous to his film endeavors, David set records during his 30-year investment career, founding and managing 2 mutual funds, which grew to $1.6 billion under management. Welcome, Tommy and David.
Yeah, thank you for having us on, Kevin, and for consistently covering this issue of the grid.
Well, let's start with the problem. Why should we be concerned about the electric power grid?
Well, just imagine life without electricity. And the longer you imagine that timeline of being without electricity, the worse it gets.
I know people don't think. That means no food, that means no water, that means, a whole lot of things that we are desperately in need of for life itself.
That's right.
Human beings need water every 3 days, and our municipal water systems are mostly 100% dependent upon our power grid.
Yeah, so you're looking at potentially, it depends on where you live. I mean, if you're in an urban environment and you need, for example, water to be pumped up to your high-rise apartment, it could just be minutes without power where you lose water pressure. And unless you're prepared to go without water that's supplied to you through that municipal water supply, then you're going to be in a bad spot, right? And that's just one tiny example. But ultimately, grid security is national security, grid security is economic security, and that's why our Center for Security Policy and its founder, Frank Gaffney, has long warned about the need to secure our grid, and that's why he started a movement to do it, over a decade ago with our Secure the Grid Coalition.
Yeah, well, you think about it, if you don't have electricity, I'll just get in my car and I'll drive someplace else, right? And that's what people do when the power goes out. They go over to the neighbors and they're fine. I mean, I read the book 1 second after, and it's frightening. The first day is not bad, second day is a little worse, third day is a little worse, and then after that it's chaos.
Yeah.
So actually the EMP Commission operated at the behest of Congress for 17 years, and they found that if we were without power for 9 months or longer, as many as 90% of Americans would die. So therefore, we're talking about a catastrophic situation.
We're just not ready to go back to the land. We're not ready to hunt, fish, get clean water, right. Live like maybe it's 1850, right?
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing about it was that when the Congressional EMP Commission did that study and they found that 90% number, the way they did it was just looked at what was the population of our country before electricity. And it was roughly 30 million people. So they kind of figured, okay, the North American landmass can hold 30 million people. And that's 10% of our current population, roughly. The difference is, as you just mentioned, Kevin, how many people today, compared to back then, know how to live without electricity? And so the unfortunate reality is that the numbers could be even worse than 90% perishing within a year because of all the circumstances David just mentioned, the societal collapse.
And medicine, you need electricity to get medicine delivered or created. Yep. If you live in a high rise, how do you even get out of your high rise if you don't? You can walk down the stairs, but then where do you sleep? Where do you live?
Yeah, and even our U.S. military will break down, and our enemies know that, right? In fact, there's a report put together by one of the members of the U.S. Air Force Electromagnetic Defense Task Force, a task force that I served on in uniform. And the report is authored by Jonathan Hollerman. He's an expert in grid down survival. a former Air Force survival instructor. And it's called Grid Down, Death of a Nation. And it lays out even the challenge the U.S. military will have to feeding its own troops. I mean, the average American consumes 5.5 pounds of food per day. That's over a ton in a year. And so you think about, like, logistically, the connection between electricity and food and water. We can't afford to lose.
But our grid is completely safe. It's not going to go down. They've been protecting it, right? I mean, what could cause a grid to go down?
So our film, Grid Down, Power Up, talks about 4 major threats. One is a EMP attack, which is a nuclear detonation 20 to 200 kilometers in the air, and it causes these gamma waves to essentially wipe out sensitive electronics. A geomagnetic disturbance is essentially a natural EMP or a solar flare. A cyber attack or a physical attack. So those are 4 major threats.
Well, we had the grid go down briefly, it seemed like, in Texas in February 2021, I think it was. We called it Snowmageddon here. It wasn't a real Snowmageddon, but it was enough to knock power out for a bunch of people. We just recently had just intense storms, and 500,000 people in Dallas-Fort Worth lost power for hours.
Right. Yeah, it's, I mean, terrestrial weather or solar weather, Mother Nature basically, is something you can't deter. And you know, to add to what David just mentioned, the cyber attack dimension has even gotten into now supply chain, right? In this country, we have over 400 Chinese manufactured transformers. We know at least one of those has a hardware backdoor in it. How many more do? How many are in the state of Texas, for example? And then, you know, finally, I hate to say it, but there are actually government policies that may result in blackouts before long, just because of the irrational things that are being done, shutting down fossil fuel and nuclear and coal generation sites, and trying to add so much to the grid that physics just won't allow it.
Mandating all electric vehicles, for example.
Exactly.
Everybody's got to have an electric car, and when you plug them all in at once, what happens?
Right, there's not enough demand, or not enough supply.
And you mentioned cyber. Didn't Vladimir Putin order a Russian attack on the Ukrainian cyber grid that took it down for a period?
Absolutely. Yeah, and the same malware that was in the Ukrainian grid, it's in our grid now.
All right, so this is scary stuff. We're going to have to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about a little more about this, but then I want to talk about some of the things we can do to prevent a collapse of our power grid. So get ready and think about, how do we fix this very serious problem? In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Here's a $10 bill. It's got the picture of Alexander Hamilton on the front of it. You know, it's kind of sad. When I was 10 years old, everything that I could buy for $1 now costs about $10. That's the cost of inflation. It's just paper. It's not backed by anything. You can't exchange it for gold and silver. You used to, but you can't do that anymore. And that's unfortunate. You know, pirates wouldn't accept this. Pirates, they wanted gold and silver. Patriots, the founders of this nation, also wanted gold and silver coin. In fact, they put a provision in the Constitution, 17 words, that said states could only make gold and silver coins tender within the states. That's why I wrote this new book, Pirate Money, Discovering the Founders' Hidden Plan for Economic Justice and Defeating the Great Reset. It will explain exactly the history of money and exactly why gold and silver coins can be made modern with new technology and a useful monetary system. PirateMoneyBook.com. Proverbs 22:3 and 27:12 both say the same thing. They say, the prudent see danger coming and prepare for it, but fools, they go blindly on and they suffer the consequences. We've got Tommy Waller and David Tice, and we're talking about the electric grid. Are there problems with the electric grid that we're facing?
Yeah, Kevin, we just talked about a few of them, those different threat vectors: physical attack or physical sabotage, cyber attack, electromagnetic pulse or any form of electromagnetic attack, Mother Nature, right, whether terrestrial weather like hurricanes or solar weather, and then we just mentioned supply chain and even irrational government policies. All of those things threaten what is really, it's the lifeblood of a modern civilization right now.
What I don't get, all right, climate change, I understand there's science that says that climate change could be catastrophic 10, 20, 30 years down the road. There's science that says that we ought to spend trillions, $100 trillion or more on a green improvement. But this seems 100% certain that if the grid goes down, that people are going to be harmed, maybe 90% passing away. This seems 100% certain that it's going to go down, whether it's just because of the patchwork nature of how it's been built. At some point it's going to have a failure, or there's weather, or there's terrorists come and shoot. Didn't they shoot up some substations and things?
North Carolina.
Yeah, why aren't they dealing with this? Why is the government not pick this up as a significant issue? David?
Well, I think the utilities, one, don't want to be told what to do, frankly. There's a lot of that. Two, they're worried a little bit about the tenuous nature of the grid, and therefore they don't want to put front-end equipment on the front end. They're worried a little bit about what it might accomplish, even though there's testing.
It's like, we got it set like we want. Don't touch it. It might fall apart.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. There's also think tanks that are telling them that the risk is low and we don't have to worry about it.
Why? What's the politics behind this?
Yeah, so it's multidimensional, and we should also really thank those that are in the utility industry that actually are working hard to keep the lights on, right? Because people say, hey, Tommy, thank you for your service in the Marines, which, I appreciate that. There's nothing I ever did in uniform that would actually have anything to do with the day-to-day survival of the American people. The people who are keeping the lights on are keeping us alive. So I think, number one, we need to thank those that are actually doing as best they can.
Is that the line workers, but also some executives and some power companies?
Some are solid, but unfortunately, as an industry, sort of the corporate culture of the industry is one where there's just regulatory capture. You see this in some powerful industries out there, pharmaceuticals in some case. In this case, when the industry wants to do something or doesn't want to do something, they can affect the government policies. And they do successfully affect those government policies. And I'll just give you an example. And I think if we just talked about one threat that we know we cannot deter, you mentioned it earlier, Kevin, which is solar weather. It's 100% certain at some point Earth will be struck by a massive coronal mass ejection from the sun. And what that does is it produces these currents in the Earth's crust, right? And what does electricity want to do? It always wants to find the path of least resistance.
Right, goes to ground. Yeah.
And so what is the path of least resistance? These long transmission lines that span our grid. And so these ground-induced currents...
Because they're made to carry current. That's why it's
right. Yeah, and so so what's attached to those things? Huge transformers. These transformers are necessary to move that voltage over long distances. High voltage, low resistance, right? So when the sun produces that ground-induced current, it senses that and it will shoot up through those transformers and into the grid, right? That's 100% going to happen at some point, and it already has. And to show you just an example about the regulatory capture, when the government sought to establish a standard to protect against it, after the 1989, remember this happened before in Quebec, 1989, transformers catastrophically ruined, and we'll get you some pictures of this as you can see. This is from official testimony to the U.S. Secretary of Energy. After that, the government told the industry to establish a standard for protection against solar weather. And I'm going to show you a graph of what that standard will look like, okay? The real threat is in yellow, orange, and red. And that's various other solar storms that have happened, or in red, that's actually nuclear EMP tests over Kazakhstan by the Russians. This is in Washington, D.C. The green bar is the protection you would get in Washington, D.C. In Texas, it's half that for the ground-induced currents. What this means is the industry had to do nothing, had to take no action whatsoever, and they can abide by this standard. The industry designed the process by which the standards are written to enable them to get away without having to take action. That's regulatory capture. And this truth has been briefed to the U.S. Secretary of Energy.
And that's why we're all at risk.
It's one huge reason we're all at risk.
So the bottom line is that if you're aware of it, and our mutual friend Bob Hall was working in the Air Force, and he was working on securing government Air Force things against electromagnetic pulse. We've known about this since we did nuclear testing, 70 years ago or something like that. But most people don't know of this risk unless you've read 1 Second After, which is a fictional account based on scientific truth, which is why you've made this movie, Grid Down, Power Up. Tell us about the movie.
So the movie's now available on YouTube. Our website is griddownpowerup.com. And again, we are outlining the 4 major risks. We talk about 4 major adversaries that frankly hate America's guts. Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. All those countries have in their war plans taking down critical civilian infrastructure. And therefore, we warn people about it. We talk a little bit about regulatory capture. We talk about potential solutions. And then we are trying to establish a movement. And we have a mechanism by which viewers of the film can send emails and make phone calls to their legislators, their regulators, their members of board of directors of their public utilities. And we need to be enraged. We need ticked off mama bears and soccer dads telling all their friends that we need to fix this and we can get this done.
Well, you're doing a good job. We were together at the Texas GOP convention. I was talking about pirate money, and we were going around talking about transactional gold and silver, but you were right there with us. In fact, you hung out in our booth for a while, passing out these little cards with Dennis Quaid's picture on it, which catches everybody's attention, because Dennis Quaid's coming out in a movie called Reagan that's coming up. It's going to be a huge movie. So you're drawing attention to this, and when people get educated, and it's an easy movie. It's hard to see, but easy to watch because it's a well-produced film. It's hard to see because it's a really tough topic, but it's easy to watch because you made a really good film with a great narration and a lot of interesting. You're really good at filmmaking. I mean, you made Soul Surfer and everything else as executive producer. So I just want to commend and congratulate you for that, and recommend that everyone in our audience, you got to get this movie. So we'll put about that in the economic battle plan. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll talk about solutions, how we fix this.
The electricity grid goes down. You're back in the 1880s, pre-electricity.
If 1,000 transformers are knocked out, we'll end up with massive social disruption.
Top former energy official claims an attack on an American power grid was terrorism.
Virtually every study you'll see has an anarchistic component that leads to rioting. It is almost inevitable.
Imagine what will happen if there is no food, no power, and no money, and no transportation. Only people with guns and the boldness to go and take what they need to survive will live.
It could literally end civilization as we know it.
Cyber attack, an EMP, even a massive solar flare. They're all capable of exposing our power grid as America's Achilles heel.
Of particular concern to me are people who believe it's God's will to destroy us.
Our electric power grids are as vulnerable to cyber attack as the thousands upon thousands of businesses, companies, government agencies that have already been hacked over the last few months. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when.
We spend $800 billion on our military.
And we're not willing to spend 50 to 100 billion to protect our society?
An EMP pulse is a very dangerous threat. If you're not nuclear hardened, it will shut down any digital computer that is operating in the range of the EMP.
other countries have appointed a single champion to be in charge of protecting their electric grids.
We know what needs to be done. It's just a matter of a will to do it.
We're talking with Tommy Waller. Tommy, how do we fix this? The grid is a danger. What do we do to make it safe for people?
So the good news, Kevin, this is unlike the whole climate change argument back and forth. This is a fixable problem, right? I mean, it can be fixed.
Affordably fixable?
It's an affordably fixable problem. In fact, I showed you earlier this testimony provided to the Secretary of Energy about that one threat you can't deter, solar weather, right? Nationwide, the cost to fix that, it's a technology called neutral ground blockers, right? A company called Imprimis that produces them. It's been tested for over a decade that block those ground-induced currents. Nationwide, about $4 billion. That's 1/3 of 1% of the Biden infrastructure bill.
Wow, it's a fraction of what we're sending to Ukraine, right?
It is absolutely affordable. Though the federal government, again, twice, I personally briefed Secretary Granholm on that threat, on the solutions that existed, and on the costs. And we've seen absolutely no action by the federal government, with one exception. We've got a report about this, and that is that there are people in Congress and in the federal government that want to take over the Texas grid. And so I think if we talk about...
Wait. Take over the Texas grid. The federal government I'm not sure I'm buying into the takeover. How does that work?
So what they want, remember we talked about this standard, this subpar standard that's established really by the industry, approved by the federal government. That's a standard by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. FERC oversees the bulk power system, except in Texas. Texas has its own grid in ERCOT. And so there's a movement now to bring Texas under the jurisdiction of FERC. We produced a report recently on that, Kevin, 5 reasons why a federal takeover would hurt grid resilience in Texas. And we outline all the failures.
So you're talking Texas independence on the grid. Okay, all right, I'm back with you.
And the reason is because there's terrible tragedy that occurred, you mentioned it, Kevin, in Winter Storm Uri, right? February 2021, 3-day blackout. Texas lost more than 240 lives of its own citizens. And it's estimated over $100 billion in economic loss, right? But that woke the people up. It woke up the legislature. It woke up the Public Utility Commission. And Texas ended up establishing a very effective standard to protect against cold weather, much faster than the federal government ever could have done. And so part of what our report does is it talks about how the federal government's failed, don't allow it to take over Texas, but use the same mechanisms that the state did after Winter Storm Uri to address every other threat, starting, we suggest, with the one we can't deter, which is solar weather.
Can we take that report and put it in our battle plan?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And the neat thing is we also have on our website an Align Act campaign. You're familiar with those where Texas citizens can actually click through and send letters to tell their elected officials, keep the Texas independent, it's grid independent, and fix these problems that's what's so frustrating, but also gives us so much hope. It's frustrating because it hasn't been fixed, and it can be, and it's affordable. The hope part is that it can be fixed and it's affordable.
Well, just think about this. I think Vladimir Putin, why do we have to fight in Ukraine? I get it. Putin's a thug. We got to fight in Ukraine because Putin cannot be allowed to, roam free across Europe and so forth. I get all those arguments. However, when you hear those arguments, we're sending so much money to defend the border in Ukraine, and you wonder, why aren't we spending a portion of that to protect our electric grid here? Because we know if Putin is a thug, he's got the capability to take down our electric grid and cripple America. It's in the Chinese warfare doctrine, unrestricted warfare. It's right there. It's their end game, is that you cause the electricity network to fail, and then you cause street riots, social crisis, and end to America. That's their plan.
Absolutely.
Actually, I agree completely, Kevin. And I tend to have been a pessimist about this because I'm worried about the future. Sometimes people call me David Downer. Yeah. I'm actually as positive as I've ever been about these proposed solutions and the cost effectiveness of this. And we're going to call for a Manhattan Project, similar in scale to what happened when we prepared for nuclear bombs.
Sounds like a very affordable Manhattan Project, though, right?
Exactly. We're talking about potentially $200 million for Texas to protect our critical civilian substations and therefore protect against all four major threats.
So, yeah, it's one of the things that's so hopeful. When David produced this film and got people like Dennis Quaid involved, you know, we refer to Dennis as the breacher. You know, people can open doors for you, and when Dennis Quaid walks in, it's like the doors get blown up. And so because of David, because of Dennis, you know, we've had the opportunity to, like what I just showed you, Kevin, what I showed your viewers, this has been shown to the Texas governor, lieutenant governor, like we sat down and briefed them. Recently had the same opportunity to brief the Public Utility Commission. There's no excuse for inaction in Texas anymore because the leaders have been briefed. What they haven't had is the people, as David said, they haven't had the people clamor to say, get this done and secure the grid.
Well, they haven't until David, and I walked with you and Senator Hall and others in Texas where they went at the GOP convention. It made the top 15 priorities, at least. It's made it into the Republican platform, and Republicans run Texas at present. So you've done a terrific job, both of you, educating people, because that's what we need is people to get up in arms and say, hey, look, federal government, this is literally a priority for government to protect the people. I mean, there are a lot of things government gets involved in that I think are ridiculous. They should never be involved in those. This is one they should be involved in. It's protecting the people, the common good.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, look, I mean, at this point, when you talk about the expenditures of the federal government on things like Ukraine or whatever, I don't trust Uncle Sam to spend my money properly. I just don't. So we're not suggesting that. In this report, we're suggesting Texas does it on its own through economics, through financial incentives for utility companies, right? The most responsible way to pay for this is through the utility companies charging it in the rate base.
I'll pay for that. I hate some of the taxes in my phone bill. I hate the taxes in my electric bill, but I absolutely want my electricity there tomorrow. I'm willing to pay a few dollars extra every month.
And when we create incentives for the utility companies to know that they can get paid to do the right thing, they're that much more likely to do it. And that's exactly what we're calling for in this report and what we hope to achieve in the state of Texas, and then from Texas, everywhere else.
Yeah, because if you do it in Texas, other places will follow. Well, thank you, Tommy. Thank you, David, for your great work on this. And here's your work. Your work is to get and watch Grid Down, Power Up. Watch the movie. Then you'll get all the facts. And how long does the movie run, David?
It's an hour and 5 minutes.
Hour and 5 minutes. You can get fully briefed on this. Now, we're going to also summarize all of this through 5 reasons why a federal takeover of Texas electric grid will hurt resilience. Everything we'll put in our free economic battle plan that you can get at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.